What this process requires of you psychologically is a lot. And sometimes self-reliance and being strong means self-care. But in case no one has said this to you recently, just know you're not alone, first and foremost.
Okay, look, how do I say this? No, for the love of all that's academic, no. You know that thing that you're thinking about doing that you're pretty sure is the right next step for your research project, but you've kind of tried this before and haven't really made much progress? Yeah, don't do it. Don't do it. Instead, and luckily for you, we've got another Grad Coach podcast, or, GCPC, that thing that you heard of so many times before. And here we're gonna explain the worst research habits that get in the way of success and how to break the loop so you can start making real progress in your research. And as ever, I'm your guy, Dr. E, and here with me once again to help y'all get out of these bad habits, and our own master optimistic realist, Dr. Amy Murdock, one of our expert coaches here to help you do what we do every single week: simplify, demystify, and take all the anxiety out of academia. Amy, I'm glad to have you here to get us on the road to recovery from these bad habits. Are you ready to get into a little research rehab?
Hi, Dr. E. Hi, everybody. If you are going through the dissertation process, you need support. What we are going to talk about today will make you feel seen and hopefully make you want to write. So let's get to it.
Oh, that's terrible. I feel like I'm on this. We need a 10-step plan now. First thing is to admit that we're academics. Just first, you have to admit you're an academic. All right, stop. We're going too far into this. Look, it's great to have you here, Amy. Thank you for joining us. And for all of you out there, before we get into it, just a little reminder that in addition to the podcast and what we're going to break down today, you can get all the information you need on guidance for each chapter of your research project, breakdowns of some of the key terms and concepts in our explainers and research boot camps, all of which you can find in the links in the descriptions somewhere down there, somewhere there. I don't know. It's down there. Click around. You're an academic. You'll find it. It's down there somewhere. All that said, we know what we're here for. So, the number one most common bad habit you guys really, really need to break: reading for reading's sake. Yeah, that one. Just reading for reading's sake. It's the kind of commitment to reading as much as you possibly can, following every vaguely interesting or compelling thread so that you can be a good researcher and get a sense of the field. And look, I get it. You're kind of supposed to be well-informed and familiar with the existing research, right? But there's just not enough time in the day between all the other tasks that your research requires, the emails you haven't replied to, the day job that pays your bills, let alone if you have kids or other family responsibilities. And then, as if to ratchet up the pressure that little bit more, there's a deadline attached to your degree. But right there is exactly the point. It's not a question of reading everything, but it's a question of understanding the right thing. And there's a difference between these two. And, ever the realist that you are, Amy, you want to explain the difference between reading everything and reading the right thing?
Okay, realist. I like that. I can live with that. I feel like that's something people say when they're about to say something mean or negative, but okay, I can be real. I was a teacher for a lot of years before becoming a coach. I can give some good advice here. Writing research is first and foremost about reading. You have to read hundreds of studies before you can even think about starting to write. That's a lot of articles. That's a lot of words that you're not going to remember. Unless you're like my old college roommate, Amika, and you have a photographic memory. And if that's the case, congratulations to you. So it's about reading with intention, reading with very specific questions or focal points, as I like to call them, in mind. That's the game. People get lost in the rabbit hole of reading without intention. I hear that from clients all the time. They just get stuck. This is interesting. That's interesting. And before you know it, everything gets jumbled up in your head and you've completely forgotten about your topic. And sometimes it may be a subconscious stuck, meaning you might be subconsciously putting off the hard stuff. Reading for reading's sake, as you said, is passive. At the end of the day, what matters is what gets on the page. So we are talking about actively skimming and scanning articles with the goal in mind of what you're looking for, as opposed to leisurely reading something from start to finish. Remember, whomever you're reading is already done with their dissertation. They have their degree. They can leisurely read stacks of research if they want. You don't have time to waste, so you should be using others' research for some well-cited point you can use to substantiate your argument. So is this what we're talking about, Dr. E? The human tendency to gravitate toward tasks that are clear, certain, and discrete, as opposed to tasks that are unclear, hard to define, outside of your comfort zone, etc. Actually thinking deeply and creatively about a problem. Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, long story short, yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. This kind of distinction between reading with intention versus reading for reading's sake is premised on the fallacy of believing that while you're doing this reading, you're a researcher. And you're not. I hate to break it to you. You're not. Like you said, that there are researchers. They're the ones you're reading. I know. It sounds mad harsh, and I don't want you to like shatter your dreams and your illusions and your impressions or whatever else. But the whole point of the struggle and the journey is for you to arrive at a place. You don't want to wake up one morning and then discover you're already a researcher. You wanted to climb up the mountain so you can kind of like, put your flag on the top and say, I made it one day, which is kind of the whole point. And to say I made it, you had to traverse a journey. Part of that journey is you becoming a researcher, and that's what you're in the process of doing, which means that for now, Amy, as ever, is always right. This is also true. The idea of reading with intention. And of course, look, we could point out the importance of your research aim and your research questions and the golden thread towards identifying the appropriate literature, constructing your lit review chapter. And yes, you can check out a pod on exactly that topic. And yes, of course, it's with your guy, Dr. E, because who else? And all of that is still true. Like, I'm not suggesting that any of that has become any less true than it was at that point. And in that respect, just briefly, just while we're on this point, it is always a good idea to develop your research aims and research questions prior to beginning your reading, even if only experimentally, because the keywords in those will tend to inform your lit review search. Literally. And even if your uni only requires that, right? Even if only your uni only requires that you have a single research question. So if your uni says, well, you only need one research question, it won't hurt to come up with what I refer to as kind of like phantom research questions, additional research questions. So you've got 2 or 3 in total, just to kind of give you more keywords to refine that search further, to kind of give you a sense of what it is that you're looking for, so that when you type in your search onto Google Scholar or wherever you're looking, you don't get 1.4 million results back, you get 4,000, right? I mean, it's still going to be a lot, but it's a little more manageable. Not to mention that there's a way to develop a system for categorizing, prioritizing your literature. So you can do that too, so that you can find and further refine your reading and focus your analysis in your lit review chapter. And yes, there's a podcast on that as well. Oh, you thought we just preach dedication and hard work. We really do it out here. But the point is, there's something to be said for adjusting your perceptions and your assumptions about your academic environment and what the degree actually requires. So in other words, look, the sooner you divest yourself of the illusion that this is some kind of like sacred place of enlightened thought and open-ended theoretical pursuit, the better. I don't know if y'all do any research, any kind of philosophy out here, but it's, what Friedrich Nietzsche kind of quoted Silenus, this idea that, hey, listen, when they asked the soothsayer what one should do with their lives, the response was, look, it's better not to be born. But if you are born, it's just better to die quickly. And it's the same thing here with the PhD research. I know, and I'm sure y'all feel the same. For those who've been doing their PhDs, MAs, or whatever else is, you get a certain point into the journey, you feel like I might have been better off not starting this in the first place. But now that you have started it, it's better to just kill it off quickly. And killing it off quickly means understanding this isn't that fantasy that you think it is. This isn't enlightened, mountain climbing to the peaks of theoretical, academia. That's not what this is. It's a license that you're trying to acquire in order to be that kind of person. You're just not there yet. So the sooner you focus on the fact that your research is just a path to accreditation, as I say, to a license, and nothing more than that, the sooner your approach to what you read, how you read, and what you do with your reading becomes a functional component of a larger whole, focused on one goal, and expressed in methodical equanimity. Yeah, that's right. I said it. Yeah. Don't give me that look, eh? Don't. I see that look. Look, but you can tell me I'm wrong though. Understanding that this is like a well-established process and not just a foray into like sunlit hills of academic curiosity will focus your perspective on reading, right?
Always with the darkness and light with you, Dr. E. Anyway, yes, reading all those research articles is one step in the overall dissertation process. You're not ever going to a book club version for research, probably. Everybody sitting around drinking coffee, debating the pros and cons of leadership theory. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see that happening. So don't get lost in it. And unless you're taking steps to get published, it's not as though anyone other than, maybe your mom and your committee are going to read your paper. We say this a lot, but I don't think it can be overstated. You are not going to solve all the world's problems with your paper. The only problem you're really solving is your lack of having a big fancy degree. I hear this phrase all the time, and let's say it all together, shall we? A good dissertation is a
complete dissertation.
Dissertation. Attach action steps to everything you do, reading including. Is that a bit too practical for you, Dr. E?
No, it's not. I mean, look, I'm conscious of the possibility that we might be kind of like, shattering one too many illusions, right? And I know some of y'all feel like we're just taking the wind out of your sails and that this feels like slightly less of a romantic journey than you thought it might have been in the first place. And I'll be honest with you, there's a degree of romanticism that you can kind of still hold onto here. And maybe I want to kind of leave you that little piece so you guys can pretend you really are on this kind of, profound academic manga style journey through academia, but you're just not. Like, I just feel like it's better for you guys to be aware of this sooner rather than later. You don't want to bump into that cold door before that leads into a dark room without knowing that it's coming, right? At least we're kind of the hope would be that we're shedding some light on what's coming up for you and what the risks are, and the understanding that this is really just the acquisition of a license to become the academic that you're trying to be, and nothing more than that. It's not what you think it might be. So yes, this does need to be practical. Yes, this does need to be realistic, and this does need to be pragmatic. And I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know. In most cases, there's a fee attached to this. I mean, I didn't do that. Like, we didn't do that. Your universities and the systems that we all live in did that, right? They decided that there should be a transactional character to your degrees. Insofar as that's the case, that's what that is. Like, it's a transactional process, and you're trying to arrive at the point where you can kind of have the freedom and the space for you to think more freely. That's the aim, where somebody else is paying you for your research as opposed to you paying for the license to get it. You see that difference? Like, that's really what this is about. But there's more. And I'll be honest, this second habit kind of drives me crazy, only because it's kind of like, it's so obviously contradictory. And this is the habit of playing the imitation game. This is the it worked for them principle. I can't stand this one. And it's the all too common reflex of using existing or published literature as a measure for what you think you could or should do with your own research project. Looking up methodologies, lit reviews, and etc., and applying them to what you see in your own work. And I get it. I get why somebody might do that. Look, sometimes supervisors, chairs, committee members, whoever is assigned to overseeing your research might not be particularly helpful, right? And maybe the university itself might not be the most organized. If I can find a paper that did something similar to what I'm doing, and I can just use that as a guide, right? So I get the kind of the intention. I mean, it worked for them, right? Wrong. Very wrong. Now, look, granted, it's not entirely wrong, but it is significantly wrong. And as with overreading, breaking this habit means understanding the nuances of your own research. But I'm starting to feel my frustration levels building. So while I take a second to woosah my way into kind of calming down, you want to explain why this is a problem and what to do about it, Amy?
Yes, take your time to woosah. Dr. E. I want you to have plenty of time for that. I mean, I do think there's a place for using others' published dissertations as a guide. In fact, one of the tricks I've learned along the way is to use regular Google search and type in the word dissertation first, and then following other keywords to locate dissertations similar to yours. But the problem is, as you said, no two dissertations, no two studies are exactly the same. And so while locating dissertations to find commonalities in structure to yours may be a way to break the ice and get going, you might find a study on the exact same topic using the exact same method, but it doesn't exactly fit with what you want to do. And also, universities will have different requirements. And even within universities, different advisors have different preferences. So you never know. And the important thing to remember too is that just because someone is doing something in their paper and they're published does not mean what you're doing is wrong. Maybe what they did was wrong. You want to develop a high level of confidence in what you're doing so you can trust your own decision making. That's the goal, right, Dr. E?
It is, and it's punctuated by the fact that, whether or not we realize it, and in most cases, admittedly not in all cases, but you're going to have to defend this. So whether you're doing a master's or a PhD and you've got a presentation or a defense that comes up, or a viva, depending on whatever country you live in and however they phrase it, ultimately somebody's going to assess the claims and the arguments that you're making and the thesis that you're presenting and the way that you have presented it. So ultimately, it's just not going to be good enough for you to say, well, they did it. I mean, that's not an argument. Like, that's not going to fly. Like, well, I read it in another paper somewhere, so that's why I'm doing it here. Well, great. If that's the case, I'm going to just ask that researcher what they were doing. Like, why you here? What I'm interested in is why you did what you did. And you need to come up with your own rationalizations for so doing. Now, that doesn't mean, and let's be clear, it's what you said already, A, and I'm with you on this one. This is not to say that there's no use whatsoever in looking at past papers. There absolutely is some use in doing that, or past theses even, and giving yourself like an understanding of how research can be conducted. But this is guidance, it's not instruction. And I know the difference between these two things is subtle, but it's significant. Ultimately, And as we said previously, look, your research parameters, your requirements, even the terminology that you're using, as you were saying, will vary from institution to institution and country to country. And this is before we even get to the point of producing an original contribution in the field, particularly for you PhDs out there. So before we even get to the details of your own research, it's already highly unlikely that the work produced by someone else on another project at another time, even if it is in the same institution, will be directly applicable to what you're doing. But you know what is directly applicable to what you're doing? What you're doing! In that sense, the point is to begin from the ground up, starting with the specifics of your own research aim, your own research questions, and then what that means for your methodological choices in terms of what works best to get the results most pertinent to the concerns of your research. Not to mention, for example, the tweaks and adjustments you'll make throughout the process as you go through literature, attempt to collect data, review your results, etc., etc. Look, the point is to manipulate and augment the options available to your research in order that they focus on the central concerns. And no matter what impression you might have, there's enough flexibility in those options, whether we're talking about your sampling strategy, your research design, or even the kind of lit review you'll conduct, to construct a sophisticated research project. And look, even though there is a deeper, darker to explore here as to what motivates the desire to imitate work from someone else, there really is here. But I'm going to put that to one side for another podcast and just say I'm not missing anything, right, Emmy? I mean, it's about constructing complementing parts of a complex whole focused on the concerns of the research itself.
Right. That's precisely what I was going to say. You can accuse me of being an optimist, but I don't think most people are looking to copy somebody else's work. It's just this feeling of anxiety over not knowing what you're doing or what you're supposed to be doing. Completely understandable, since no one knows what they're doing the first time you're writing the research paper. But you gotta muddle through it. It's the only way. And I think there is a distinction between using others' works as guides and not carbon copy imitating. This isn't an IKEA manual you can just follow step by step. No amount of graphics labeling the right nails and screws is going to give you clear instructions of how to organize your research paper. So maybe you have a few papers as guides rather than just choosing one, so you resist that urge and you are more inclined to pick and choose what you think is valid and can be conceptually applied to your paper. So Dr. E, do you think it's possible to use others' work as reference without steering too far into the imitation game?
No, I don't. I think it's a terrible... No, I'm kidding, of course. No, look, the fact is that you're going to cite sources, right? You're going to refer to sources that you have to cite. You're going to cite a theoretical framework at some point, and you're going to have to depend on that theoretical framework for the interpretation of your data. You're going to potentially cite sources for the purposes of the methodology that you've adopted and the rationalization for why that methodological approach makes the most sense for what you're trying to achieve. There are sources that you're going to cite here. The same thing is going to be true in your literature review. The critical analysis that you present of a particular theory or of a particular paper might be reflected by another paper who has the same kind of criticism of that paper as you do. I mean, there's a myth underlying all of this, and I don't want to overplay the point about the original aspect of your contribution. The fact of the matter is that your contribution is never going to be so original that no one's ever done this before. That's just humanity. Like, I don't know what to tell you. There's 7-point-something billion of us. Like, get over yourself. It ain't going to be that unique, right? But dude, there's a deeper point there. None of us are going to be that unique, but that's a whole other thing. But that said, you are almost always going to be relying on these papers in order to inform your research. Nevertheless, there's a key distinction to be made here between having that inform your work and then just incorporating it uncritically versus trying to assess whether or not you can augment, adjust, nuance, tweak, or correct existing methods and existing approaches for the purpose of trying to make sure what you're doing actually makes sense for your project. And yes, I know this sounds super technical. It is. And I know it sounds super complex. It can be. And I know that this sounds like you might need some support. We're right here. We ain't going nowhere. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You ain't on your own doing this. Like, we're right here. But there might be one more habit that's potentially like the worst of the three. Not only am I sure the whole bunch of you do this, I'm just as sure that some of you actually think it's necessary. Like, this is worst. Some of y'all do this out of like convictions that you're supposed to be doing this, which is the slide into like solipsism, self-reliance, and silent suffering. There's a lot of S's in that, but still, it's the god-awful habit of self-reliance and its inevitable consequence, which is suffering in silence. I need to explain this to y'all though, really. Like, do y'all really not know what this feels like? It's that whole range of thoughts, right? From, I want to do this independently, to I'm not sure how to ask for support, to I'm not sure anyone else really understands my topic. But no matter how you phrase it, the consequence is that you end up relying almost exclusively on yourself, and therefore struggling on your own too. And I mean, putting to one side the fact that you are always 1 or 2 clicks away from all the support you could need, and yes, I do mean us, the truth is that you just end up making all the mistakes that a little guidance could have had you avoid in the first place. And I could keep going, and don't even get me started on the whole independence thing, so Amy, please take over and tell our peoples why this is such a bad habit.
Yeah, I don't want you to get riled up about the independence thing. That would be awful. I mean, I guess it depends on how you're using the word. It is true that there are limitations of being self-reliant. Research is not meant to be done alone, after all. That's why there's an acknowledgement section, right? But having said that, I mean, self-reliance is not in and of itself a bad thing. I think developing self-reliance is particularly important when it comes to the process of writing your dissertation in order to survive, right? And so maybe we can debate about that. However, I'd say if you're feeling frustrated to the point of not making any progress, it is time to ask for help. If your stress level is getting higher by the day and you're having this feeling like you're stuck or you don't know what to do next, you need to ask for help. While there's no way around the fact that this is an extremely difficult task, there are those of us who have gone through it and are happy to help. That is why Grad Coach stays so busy. We often work with folks who are at that point of frustration and who have the courage to ask for professional outside assistance. I love what I do. I try to help people and step in and be that person I know my clients are needing. And I know you do too, Dr. E.
It's facts. That's actually kind of facts. It's geeky, but it's facts. It's true. Like, is it a bad thing that you said we stay busy? And in my head, all I could hear is that Drake song, like,
working on a weekend like usual.
Yo, that's just what it is. Like, I'm constantly working, but it's true. We stay busy for that reason. People are taking advantage of that support, and I feel like, it's there for that reason. We could do this, and we can have that debate about self-reliance and independence. I don't know if this is necessarily the place to do it right now, but there's definitely a debate to be had there, and you don't want to get me too riled up, but although I'm sure there's a bunch of YouTubers, IG influencers, TikTokers, and etc. who have all kinds of like practical advice and guidance on how to find the right support and make use of available resources, let's leave amateur hour to them. This is not a habit that has a technical solution. It's not. This is one of these habits that really is a matter of setting your mind straight. This idea of being solipsistic and self-reliant, the way you get out of this isn't by employing some kind of technical piece of advice or some technical piece of guidance. It's about understanding things differently. It genuinely is a switch in the way you're approaching your work, the way you're approaching academia, never mind the way you're approaching yourself. But that's a deeper conversation we could have another day. But still, who better to break this down for you than your resident philosopher, right? So let me put you in the right direction here. Remember that first and foremost, almost nothing that you produce, and I'm not just talking about academics in your projects and what have yous here. I mean, I am, but I'm not just talking about that. Anything that anybody produces of any value is almost never something that is produced in isolation. And in that respect, no substantive research project is going to be possible without existing research to support your analyses and a field into which your work will contribute. And don't fool yourself, even if your entire research project is conducted in a log cabin somewhere distant from the world, surrounded by nothing but books and papers and... Wait a minute while I fantasize for a second. That sounds amazing. But anyway, it sounds fire, bro. But anyway, you can fool yourself into thinking that, but you're even under those conditions, you're still not going to be entirely self-reliant. But you're going to be progressing along a path that was already prepared for you, whether you recognize it or otherwise. I mean, even Mozart. This is musicians and composers sitting in their own room somewhere. Even Mozart didn't think he was making his own music by himself. His argument was he just happened to be there at the time that it came through him. Like, it wasn't him doing it. And by equal measure, the grandeur and majesty of like one of the largest oak trees you can find is reflected in its proportional rootedness in the earth and the surrounding plant life that sustains it. By that measure too, the quality of your work is amplified and extended by your rootedness in the support systems that surround you and feed the fruition of your research. You see what I did there? Now, of course, I get it. Sometimes this isn't easy to do, right? And maybe as we said beforehand, your supervisor, your chair, your committee member just isn't available. And maybe you don't have a circle of friends that can give meaningful advice. Or your family is not filled with academics who know exactly what to do at every turn. My God, do I know what that's like. But you do have fellow students. These are people who share your experiences, your struggles, your uncertainties, and maybe even supervisors so you can talk to them. Start a study group, meet up casually to vent about your research. Look, whatever it takes to draw on the support already available to you. And I've got stories of how important some of my fellow students were throughout my academic journey. I've got a bunch of stories actually, and I'm sure you do too, eh? But it kind of makes sense to avoid absolute self-reliance and turn to the people around you, right?
That's right, resident philosopher. Do I have to call you Mr. Resident Philosopher?
Hey, doctor, we earned this, all right? Doctor.
Oh, that's what doctor mean. Okay, got it. Yeah, I definitely relied heavily on my cohorts going through the process. Absolutely. I don't think I could have gotten through it without them. Everything from technical things to emotional support. I mean, we would go to coffee shops and sit in silence and work. And just knowing there was someone next to you going through the exact same thing, it's motivating. You can ask questions in real time as opposed to having to wait for somebody's email. And we've talked about this before. What this process requires of you psychologically is a lot. And self-reliance and being strong means self-care, which can mean asking for help. But in case no one has said this to you recently, just know you're not alone, first and foremost.
I mean, I'm trying to hold back. I don't
want to offend you.
You know full well there's a deep dark soul in here that insists, no bro, you're alone in a dark cave and don't nobody want to talk to you. Like
always with the deep darkness, always.
Can't help it. But no, the fact is that, like, look, you're right. Ultimately, you're right. This is the case. And let me make this really, really clear in case we haven't made it already abundantly clear. It's not even necessarily the case that you're going to be surrounded by other academics or other people who are in a position to be able to advise you on the specifics or the technicalities of your own work, right? And it's not even necessarily the case that the advice or the relief that you need comes from that. As you were saying, it's a question of self-care. Like, maybe you're just stressed out right now. Like, maybe your brain just can't work through the next aspect of this piece of the lit review, or this piece of the methodology, or this piece of whatever it is that you happen to be stuck on at this particular period of time. Maybe you're just stuck. And maybe what would relieve that, or maybe what would kind of give you the space for you to be able to move forward with that, is doing something different and just hanging out with a friend, or hanging out with a loved one, or a partner, or whatever, going for a walk, something. Like, it could very well be the case that the support systems that surround you don't look like they're academic, but end up informing or improving your academic performance, whether you realize it or not. Like, it doesn't have to be that it's tailored identically that way. Now, this isn't to say that in expert circumstances, in expert situations, you don't need expert advice. And there's a time and place for that. And I'm not saying that that isn't something that you shouldn't be tapping into as and when is necessary. But generally speaking, as a broad attitude with respect to how you're going to approach your research, this habit of thinking that you necessarily need to do this on your own, that you need to be independent, that it needs to be an expression of just your own effort, is a fallacy at best and a lie at worst, designed to screw you over. That has never been how research has ever worked. That's never been how academia has ever worked. Let me just say this as a side note. Before we got to a system where everybody had to pay for their degrees, we used to have patrons. This used to be a thing. Like, the only way that you got access to degrees and literature and God knows whatever else is because some rich person somewhere was willing to help fund your way through this. Or that is to say, to help fund your life so that you can dedicate all of your time to reading and what have you. Even under those circumstances, you weren't doing this on your own. There's an institution you go to. You're not doing this on your own. There's university professors and teachers and what have you, and a whole building that's set up, not to mention hundreds of, or if not thousands of years of research. You're not doing this on your own. But if nothing else, there's a train driver or a public transport driver that took you to the university. You're not doing this on your own. Like, it might feel like it, but it's not as alone as you think it is. And the conviction that you need to be alone is part of the misinterpretation or the misunderstanding of your personal responsibilities. In fact, it's the overemphasis of your personal responsibilities, and that's why I'm always suspicious about this whole self-reliance thing. Yourself is a given. If you're relying on it too much, you probably missed the trick. It should already be there. You shouldn't have to have a self and then you rely on it after the fact. I shouldn't have to do that. It was there anyway. I rely on the people around me. That's what I rely on. Who I am is a self, fine, that's cool, and I do as much as I could possibly manage. But the people around me keep me moving and keep me progressing, whether or not I'm aware of it. That's why they're the people around me. All right, see, now I'm catching all your optimism. And this is rubbing off. I don't know if I like this. I mean, but then, maybe it makes sense because, maybe you're the yin to my yang and all of that. But, all right, look, on that note of accord, let me just wrap this up and explain that what we're saying about these bad habits is that there are 3 really kind of common bad habits. And either you're stuck in those bad habits now or you're teetering on the edge of them. And they are: 1, reading for reading's sake, something that you need to avoid. And remember how important it is to treat your reading as a functional feature, or as Dr. Amy was saying, as an intentional bit of reading, but a functional feature of developing what you set out in your research aims and your research questions, and not just a drift into academic curiosity. 2 is playing this imitation game, or the it worked for them principle. We need to stop this because your work is precisely that. So helpful though it may be to look at other examples and see how that work is constructed, your own research will always be better developed according to its own requirements. Move accordingly. And then 3, avoiding or not sliding into solipsism, self-reliance, and silent suffering. Look, the fact is, you never were really doing this on your own. No one can take your degree or research away from you, so reaching out for support from wherever you can find it, it's just never a bad thing. And while we know that there are a lot more bad habits and traps that you can find yourself stuck in, it's a 30-minute podcast. I mean, what do you want us to do? But with any luck, this will get you started on breaking some of the more common habits in your research journey. Amy, our resident research rehab expert, thank you for joining me on today's podcast and helping us kick the habit.
Thank you, Dr. Resident Philosopher Man. This was fun.
All right, it wraps up today's episode, and as ever, we appreciate you all joining us for it. Remember, if you are looking for straightforward, clear, simple, and real-world advice on any aspect of your research project, you can grab a free copy of our research project chapter templates, as well as checking out our blogs and explainers covering all the areas for developing, constructing, and composing your research. All of those can be found in the description below. And lastly, if you got value from this video, please hit the like and subscribe button, or better still, check the site, have a consultation with one of our coaches, and you are definitely going to want to check out this next podcast. But for now, this is Dr. E and Amy wishing you all productivity, progress, and positive results. Peace.